The Grand Council chamber had never felt so suffocating. Lyra pressed herself against the cold stone wall near the archive's entrance, her heart hammering as she clutched the worn leather folder to her chest. She should not be here. Omegas of her station belonged in the background, sorting documents and keeping records, not witnessing the trial of the Alpha King himself. But something had compelled her to stay when the emergency session was called, something beyond curiosity or duty. The documents she had discovered 3 days ago, while cataloging century-old treaties burned in her hands like hot coals, their implications too massive for someone like her to carry alone. King Theron Blackridge stood in the center of the circular chamber, his massive frame radiating controlled fury, even as silver chains bound his wrists. The enchanted restraints were meant to suppress an Alpha's power, but even diminished, his presence dominated the space. His dark eyes swept across the 12 council members seated in their elevated positions, and Lyra saw something in his expression that made her wolf whine with distress. Not fear, never fear, but a bone-deep weariness mixed with betrayal. The most powerful Alpha in 5 kingdoms was being brought down, not by enemies at the gate, but by rot from within. Elder Marius stood at the prosecutor's position, his gray robes flowing as he gestured dramatically. His voice carried the weight of assumed authority as he addressed the gathered witnesses and nobles permitted to observe the proceedings. The accusations were damning and specific. Financial records showing the king diverting funds meant for border defenses into personal accounts. Correspondence with enemy pacts suggesting he had been selling territorial information. Testimonies from servants and guards claiming they had witnessed suspicious meetings in the dead of night. The evidence seemed overwhelming, carefully constructed over months to paint a picture of a ruler who had betrayed every oath he had sworn. Lyra's fingers tightened on the folder. She had spent 3 years working in the palace archives, a position given to low-ranking Omegas, because it required patience and attention to detail, rather than strength or status. Most days she was invisible, which suited her fine. She had learned long ago that being noticed as an Omega usually meant trouble, but her invisibility had allowed her to discover what others missed. While searching for property deeds from the previous century, she had found a hidden compartment in one of the old filing cabinets. Inside were the original financial records and correspondence, the real ones, showing that every piece of evidence being presented against the king had been expertly forged. More than that, she had found letters discussing the forgery itself, written in a code she had painstakingly deciphered using historical cipher keys from the archive. The conspiracy involved 5 of the 12 council members, including Elder Marius himself. They planned to depose Theron, install a puppet king from a weaker bloodline, and divide the kingdom's power among themselves. The scope of the betrayal made her physically ill when she first understood it. These were men who had served under Theron's father, who had sworn oaths of loyalty, who were now orchestrating the destruction of a king whose only crime was being too strong and too just for their manipulations. Before you find out what happens next, if you are enjoying this story of courage and unexpected destiny, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring you more stories of supernatural romance and intrigue. Now, let us see what choice Lyra makes in this moment that will change everything. Elder Marius was building toward his conclusion, his voice rising with false righteousness. The king would be stripped of his title and executed for high treason. His lands would be redistributed. His bloodline would be marked with shame for generations. Lyra watched Theron's face and saw no fear there, only a cold acceptance that twisted something in her chest. He had already lost his mate 2 years ago to illness, had no heir, and clearly believed this betrayal was simply the final cruelty of a fate that had already taken everything that mattered. He would die without fighting, because he no longer saw a reason to fight. That thought broke something in Lyra. Perhaps it was the injustice of watching a good king be destroyed by lies. Perhaps it was the way her wolf had been restless and agitated since the moment she entered the chamber, pushing at her with unusual insistence. Perhaps it was simply that 3 years of being invisible had taught her that sometimes the only person who could speak the truth was someone with nothing to lose. Whatever the reason, Lyra found herself stepping away from the wall, her soft footsteps somehow audible in the moment of silence as Elder Marius paused for effect. Every eye in the chamber turned to her. The weight of their attention was crushing, especially the predatory focus of the council members who were part of the conspiracy. Elder Marius's expression shifted from theatrical righteousness to genuine shock, and then quickly to cold calculation. Lyra's voice came out steadier than she expected when she spoke, carrying clearly in the acoustics designed to project even a whisper. She identified herself as a junior archivist and stated that she had evidence that proved the king's innocence and exposed the real traitors. The council erupted in chaos. Elder Marius recovered quickly, his voice sharp as he demanded to know what evidence a low-ranking Omega could possibly possess that the council had not already examined. He gestured dismissively, suggesting she was either confused or seeking attention, playing on every prejudice about Omega intelligence and credibility. But Theron had turned to look at her fully for the first time, and Lyra felt the impact of his gaze like a physical force. Those dark eyes were no longer weary, but intensely focused, evaluating her with the tactical assessment of a warrior king. She saw the exact moment he caught her scent, saw his nostrils flare slightly, and his entire body go rigid within the chains. His expression shifted to something between shock and denial, but he said nothing, waiting to hear what she would say. Lyra opened the folder with trembling fingers and began to present her findings. She showed the original financial records that proved the king's accounts had never been touched, that the diversion of funds had been created through clever forgery by altering dates and amounts in copied ledgers. She presented the original correspondence that showed the king had been investigating enemy movements, not collaborating with them, and that his night meetings had been with his own spies reporting intelligence. Most damning of all, she presented the coded letters discussing the conspiracy itself, and she had brought the cipher keys to prove her translation was accurate. The chamber fell silent as she spoke, her voice gaining confidence as she laid out each piece of evidence in chronological order. She had learned from 3 years of archival work how to build a case through documentation, and she used every skill now. Elder Marius tried to interrupt several times, but the head of the council, Elder Thane, silenced him with a raised hand. Thane was not part of the conspiracy, and his expression grew darker with each revelation. When Lyra finished, she held out the folder toward him, offering to submit it as official evidence. The moment the documents left her hands, Lyra knew she had signed her own death warrant. The 5 conspirators on the council could not let her live now that she had exposed them. She saw it in their eyes, the cold promise of retribution, but she had done what needed to be done. If she died, at least it would not be in a world where a good king was murdered by lies while she stayed silent. What happened next moved with shocking speed. Elder Thane took the documents and began examining them with the practiced eye of someone who had spent decades evaluating evidence. 2 other council members not involved in the conspiracy moved to stand beside him, their body language protective. Elder Marius made a move toward the exit, but Theron's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. Despite the chains, despite the suppression of his power, the command in his tone froze everyone in place. He ordered the chamber sealed, and the guards to arrest the 5 council members Lyra had named. The head guard hesitated only a moment before obeying, responding to the authority that needed no supernatural power to enforce it. The conspirators tried to fight, both politically and physically. Elder Marius began shouting about procedure and proper investigation, but his words rang hollow against the evidence now being examined by neutral council members. One of the conspirators, a younger council member named Vex, actually shifted partially and tried to attack Lyra. He did not make it 2 steps before Theron broke the chains with a surge of power that should have been impossible while wearing the enchanted restraints. The sound of shattering silver echoed through the chamber as the Alpha King moved with lethal speed, positioning himself between Lyra and the threat. The growl that erupted from his chest was primal and absolute, the sound of a true alpha protecting what was his. Vex froze, his partial shift dissolving as every instinct screamed at him to submit. Theron did not touch him, did not need to. The display of power and the clear message in his stance was enough. Guards rushed forward to restrain the conspirators properly, and within minutes, All 5 were in chains, far stronger than the ones that had held the king. Elder Thane's voice was grave as he announced that based on preliminary examination, the evidence appeared genuine and warranted immediate investigation. The charges against King Theron were suspended pending full review, and the conspirators would be held for trial on charges of treason. The session was adjourned in chaos, nobles and witnesses rushing to leave and spread word of the dramatic reversal. Lyra found herself rooted to the spot, her legs shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. She had done it. She had actually done it. The king was safe, but she was very much not safe, and they both knew it. Conspiracies this deep did not end with 5 arrests. There would be others, allies and agents throughout the palace and beyond, and they would all want her dead. Theron approached her slowly, as if worried sudden movement might cause her to bolt. Up close, he was even more overwhelming, tall and powerfully built, with the scars of someone who had earned his position through combat as well as birthright. His dark hair was pulled back, revealing sharp features, and those intense eyes that seemed to see straight through her. When he spoke, his voice was low and meant only for her ears. He asked for her name, and when she gave it, something flickered across his face, testing the sound of it. Then he told her she was in danger, and under his personal protection, effective immediately. She would be moved to secure quarters in the royal wing, and guarded at all times until the conspiracy was fully dismantled. Lyra wanted to argue that she did not need royal quarters, that she could return to her small room in the servants' section, but the look in his eyes stopped her. This was not a request. More than that, she could feel something building between them, a pull that made her wolf surge forward with recognition and longing. The mate bond. She had heard of it all her life, but never expected to experience it. Certainly never with someone like him. From his reaction earlier, he felt it too. But his expression now was carefully controlled, giving nothing away. He was grateful for her intervention, clearly, but he was also a king who had just discovered betrayal from trusted advisors. Trust would not come easily. If you are wondering how this complicated situation will develop between an Omega who risked everything and an Alpha King who has been betrayed, make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss what happens next. Drop a comment below telling us if you think Lyra was brave or reckless to speak up. Now let us continue with their story. The royal quarters were absurdly luxurious compared to anything Lyra had ever experienced. The suite she was given was larger than the entire servants' dormitory wing. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the palace gardens, currently stark in late autumn but still beautiful. The furniture was carved from dark wood and upholstered in deep blues and silvers. A fireplace large enough to walk into dominated one wall, already lit and warming the space. She had her own bathroom with a tub that could fit 4 people, and a bedroom with a bed so massive and soft she was almost afraid to touch it. 2 guards were posted outside her door at all times, ostensibly for her protection, but also clearly there to watch her. Theron had not spoken to her again after the council session beyond giving orders to his staff about her accommodation and security. That was 3 days ago. In that time, Lyra had been confined to these rooms with no communication, except for servants who brought meals and fresh clothes. The clothes themselves were another source of anxiety. They were fine quality, suitable for a noble, not a low-ranking Omega archivist. Someone had assessed her size and provided an entire wardrobe overnight. It felt like being dressed up as someone she was not, and she did not understand the purpose. She spent the time trying to process everything that had happened. The mate bond hummed constantly at the edge of her awareness, a connection she could feel, even without being near him. Her wolf was restless, wanting to seek him out, but Lyra kept strict control. Just because fate had decided they were mates did not mean Theron wanted her. He was a king who had loved and lost his true mate already. The bond could be rejected if one or both parties chose not to complete it, and she suspected that was exactly what would happen once the immediate crisis passed. He would thank her for her service, probably give her some reward, and send her away to a comfortable life somewhere far from the palace. The thought hurt more than it should. On the evening of the 3rd day, the door to her suite opened, and Theron walked in without knocking. Lyra shot to her feet from where she had been curled in a window seat reading, her heart jumping into her throat. He was dressed less formally than at the council session, in dark pants and a simple shirt, but he still radiated power and authority. His expression was unreadable as he dismissed the guards with a gesture and closed the door behind him, sealing them in together. The click of the lock felt very loud in the sudden silence. He studied her for a long moment, taking in her appearance in the fine clothes, and something dark flickered across his face before he controlled it. When he spoke, his voice was measured and careful, the tone of someone interrogating a potential threat rather than greeting a mate. He told her they needed to talk, and she should sit. It was not a suggestion. Lyra sat back down in the window seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their shaking. Theron took a chair across from her, maintaining distance, his posture alert and ready despite the casual setting. The interrogation was thorough and relentless. He wanted to know everything about her background, her family, how she came to work in the archives, who her friends were, what her routines had been. He asked about the discovery of the documents in minute detail, wanting to know exactly when and how and why she had been looking in that particular cabinet. He questioned her about the cipher, how she learned to decode it, whether anyone had helped her. His questions were sharp and sometimes circled back to points he had already covered, clearly trying to catch her in any inconsistency. Lyra answered honestly, because she had nothing to hide. She was the daughter of farmers from the Southern Territories who had died in a border raid when she was 15. She had been brought to the capital with other orphaned Omegas and given basic education and work training. She had shown aptitude for detailed work and been assigned to the archives where she had worked quietly for 3 years. She had no close friends, because keeping to herself was safer. She found the documents by accident while doing her assigned work. She learned ciphers because she was curious, and the archive had historical texts on cryptography. No one helped her, because no one paid attention to her. As she spoke, she watched his face and saw the internal war. He was fighting. Part of him wanted to believe her, she could tell. The mate bond was pushing him toward trust, and her straightforward answers were clearly what he wanted to hear. But another part, the part that had just been betrayed by people he had trusted for years, could not let go of suspicion. He asked her directly why she had risked herself to defend him when they had never spoken before, when she owed him nothing. The question was loaded with meaning, and they both knew he was really asking about the mate bond. Lyra met his eyes and told him the truth. She spoke up because it was the right thing to do, because watching an innocent person be destroyed by lies was wrong no matter who that person was. She acknowledged that yes, she had felt the pull of the mate bond in the council chamber, but she had made her decision to speak before she was close enough to him for that recognition. Her sense of justice had motivated her action, not fate or self-interest. She told him that she understood he had no reason to trust her, that she understood the bond complicated everything, and that she would accept whatever decision he made about how to handle the situation. The silence stretched between them after she finished speaking. Theron's expression had shifted during her words, some of the hardness easing, but wariness remained. He stood abruptly and moved to the window, looking out at the darkening gardens. When he spoke again, his voice was rougher, less controlled. He told her that his previous mate, Elena, had died 2 years ago from a wasting illness that no healer could cure. They had been together since they were teenagers, had been happy, and her loss had broken something in him. He had resigned himself to ruling alone, focusing entirely on his duties and his people. He had not expected fate to give him a second chance, and he did not know if he wanted one. Then he turned back to face her, and the pain in his eyes was raw and real. He told her that the conspiracy went deeper than the 5 arrested council members. His investigation over the past 3 days had uncovered evidence that his former betrothed, a woman named Sarah, who he had been courting before Elena died, was one of the masterminds. Sarah was from a powerful noble family and had seemed supportive during his grief. But she had apparently seen his vulnerability as opportunity. She had been working to position herself as his new mate and future queen, while simultaneously orchestrating his downfall as insurance in case he rejected her suit. The betrayal cut deep because he had been considering her offer, had thought perhaps duty could replace the love he had lost. Theron's voice turned cold as he explained that Sarah had been arrested that morning trying to flee the kingdom. Under interrogation, she had revealed that the conspiracy had dozens of participants across the nobility, military, and merchant classes. They had been planning a coup for over a year, just waiting for the right moment. If Lyra had not intervened, he would be dead by now, and the kingdom would have descended into civil war as the conspirators fought over the spoils. One Omega, with a sense of justice, had saved not just his life, but potentially thousands of lives. He crossed the room and knelt in front of her, bringing them to eye level. The gesture was shocking from a king, but his expression was deadly serious. He told her that he owed her a debt that could never be repaid. He also told her that the mate bond was real and undeniable, but he needed time. He had been burned by misplaced trust and was terrified of making another mistake, especially one that involved his heart. He asked if she would be willing to stay at the palace while they dealt with the remaining conspiracy, and while he tried to figure out if he could trust what fate was offering them. He promised her safety and comfort regardless, and he swore he would never force the bond on her if she ultimately did not want it. Lyra felt tears burning her eyes at the vulnerability he was showing her. This was not the cold interrogation of earlier, but a broken man trying to be honest despite his fear. She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and placed her hand over his where it rested on his knee. The touch sent sparks through the bond, and they both inhaled sharply at the intensity. She told him she would stay. She told him she understood needing time. She also told him gently that she could feel his wolf, reaching for hers through the bond, and while his human mind might doubt, his wolf knew the truth. They were meant to be together, and eventually, his heart would catch up to what his instincts already knew. Make sure to share this video with friends who love supernatural romance with deep emotional layers. The best stories are the ones we experience together, so spread the word and let us know in the comments what you think Theron should do next. Now back to the story. The following weeks were strange and intense. Theron's investigation into the conspiracy consumed most of his time, but he made a point of having dinner with Lyra every evening. The meals were initially awkward, both of them dancing around the mate bond and their complicated situation. But gradually they began to truly talk. Lyra learned that beneath the cold authority was a man who cared deeply about his people and carried the weight of their welfare like a physical burden. He had become king at 21 when his father died suddenly, and he had spent the last decade building alliances, strengthening defenses, and trying to create prosperity for all citizens regardless of rank. Theron learned that Lyra had a sharp mind and a dry sense of humor that emerged once she felt safe enough to show it. She had educated herself through reading everything she could access in the archives, and her knowledge of history and law was extensive even if informal. She saw patterns that others missed and had insights into political situations that surprised him. More than once, he found himself discussing kingdom business with her and genuinely valuing her perspective. She approached problems with a combination of compassion and practicality that balanced his sometimes overly tactical mindset. The conspiracy trials began in the second week. Over 40 people were implicated in various levels of involvement, from the 5 council members who faced execution for treason to minor players who had simply looked the other way or passed messages without understanding the full scope. Theron showed mercy where he could, commuting sentences for those who cooperated and showed genuine remorse, but he was ruthless with the true architects. The trials were public and thorough, designed to restore faith in the kingdom's justice system and prove that no one, regardless of rank, was above the law. Sarah's trial was the hardest. Lyra insisted on attending, despite Theron's suggestion that she might want to avoid it. She sat in the gallery and watched as the woman who had tried to marry Theron and orchestrate his death was confronted with the evidence of her crimes. Sarah was beautiful and poised, playing the victim until the very end, claiming she had been manipulated by the council members and had only wanted to help Theron through his grief. The performance might have worked on some, but the documented evidence was damning. She had personally ordered the forgery of financial records and had written many of the coded letters discussing the king's execution. When Sarah finally realized her charm would not save her, her mask dropped and pure venom emerged. She looked directly at Theron and told him he had always been too soft, too concerned with fairness and the welfare of the weak. A true alpha would have ruled through strength and fear, would have taken what he wanted without worrying about consent or justice. She had planned to rule beside him and teach him to be the conqueror he should have been, but since he insisted on being weak, she had decided to replace him with someone who understood real power. Her words were meant to wound, but they only reinforced for everyone present how fortunate the kingdom was that she had failed. The sentence was death by beheading, to be carried out at dawn the following day. As Sarah was led away, still spewing hatred, Theron sat motionless on his throne, his face carved from stone. After the chamber cleared, Lyra approached him slowly. She did not offer platitudes about how he had done the right thing, or how Sarah did not deserve his grief. She simply sat on the steps below the throne in silent companionship, letting him process in his own time. After a long while, he reached down and took her hand, threading their fingers together. They sat like that until full dark, the physical connection providing comfort that words could not. Sarah's execution was carried out at dawn as decreed. Theron observed as was required of him, his expression cold and remote, the face of a king dispensing justice. Lyra watched from a window in the palace, her heart aching for the pain he was hiding behind duty. When he returned to his chambers afterward, she was waiting outside his door. He looked at her with eyes full of grief and exhaustion, and without speaking, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. He went rigid for a heartbeat, then crushed her against him, his face buried in her hair as his control finally cracked. They stood in the hallway, while he shook with silent tears for the woman he had thought he knew, for the trust that had been violated, for the weight of having to order someone's death no matter how deserved. That embrace was the turning point. Theron stopped fighting the mate bond after that, stopped trying to keep emotional distance from Lyra. He still moved slowly, careful not to rush or pressure her, but he stopped denying what was building between them. They began spending more time together beyond the formal dinners. He showed her the parts of the palace she had never seen as a low-ranking servant, the private gardens and libraries, the training grounds and strategy rooms. She met his inner circle of advisors who had remained loyal, and they quickly learned to value her input, despite her Omega status and common background. The kingdom was healing, slowly but surely. The conspiracy trials concluded with justice served, and reforms implemented to prevent such widespread corruption from taking root again. New council members were appointed, chosen for integrity rather than noble birth. Oversight systems were established for financial records and official communications. Theron used the crisis as opportunity to strengthen the kingdom's foundations and root out other instances of corruption and abuse that had been hiding in the shadows. Lyra worked beside him in many of these efforts, her archivist skills and historical knowledge proving invaluable in researching precedents and uncovering hidden wrongdoing. 4 months after the council chamber confrontation, Theron asked Lyra to walk with him in the private gardens. Spring had arrived, transforming the stark landscape she had first seen from her windows into an explosion of color and life. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached a secluded gazebo surrounded by flowering trees. Theron stopped and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. His expression was open in a way it rarely was even now, vulnerability and hope mingling with lingering fear. He told her that he had spent months trying to understand how fate could be kind enough to give him a second chance at happiness. He had questioned whether it was real, whether he deserved it, whether he was capable of opening his heart again after so much loss and betrayal. But every day with her had shown him that she was not a replacement for Elena, or a prize to be won. She was her own person, strong and brilliant and compassionate, and she had chosen to see value in him beyond his title and power. She had risked everything to defend his honor when she owed him nothing, and she had stood beside him through the darkest period of his reign, asking for nothing in return. Theron's voice roughened with emotion as he told her that he was done being afraid. He loved her, fully and completely, and if she would have him, he wanted to complete the mate bond and spend the rest of his life proving he was worthy of her courage and her heart. He had a ring, a simple band of silver with a moonstone that caught the light, and he held it out to her, with hands that actually trembled. He said he knew he came with complications and dangers, that being queen would put her in the spotlight when she had spent her life in the shadows. But he would protect her and cherish her, and never take her strength for granted. Lyra's answer was to pull him down into a kiss that sent the mate bond blazing between them like wildfire. Yes, she told him when they finally broke apart. Yes, to all of it. She loved him too, had been falling for him since those first awkward dinners when she saw the man beneath the crown. She did not need easy. She needed real. And what they had built together through crisis and healing was more real than anything she had imagined possible. The mate bond would make them stronger together than they could ever be apart, and she was ready to face whatever came next at his side. The mating ceremony was held under the full moon a week later. It was smaller than a royal wedding would typically be, attended only by trusted friends and advisors, but it was perfect. Ancient rituals were observed as they bound their lives and wolves together, the mate bond snapping into full completion with a surge of power that lit up the night. When Theron marked her, and she marked him in return, claiming each other before the moon goddess and their pack, Lyra felt a rightness settle into her bones. This was where she belonged, not because fate decreed it, but because they had chosen it, despite every reason to be afraid. The kingdom rejoiced at the news of their king's mating to the Omega who had saved his life. Stories spread of the archivist who stood up to conspirators and won a king's heart, and Lyra found herself becoming a symbol of hope for lower-ranking wolves throughout the realm. If an Omega with no status or power could change the course of history through courage and conviction, what might be possible for others who had been taught to stay silent and invisible? Theron encouraged this shift in perspective, implementing reforms that gave voice to those traditionally excluded from power and creating opportunities based on merit rather than birth. Lyra adapted to her role as queen with the same determination that had driven her to speak up in the council chamber. She used her position to champion education and record-keeping, establishing libraries in every major settlement and training programs for promising young people regardless of rank. She worked with healers to improve access to medical care for all citizens. She even convinced Theron to create an official position for a royal archivist, elevating the work of preserving history and learning to the importance it deserved. The Omega, who had once been invisible, now stood at the center of meaningful change, and she refused to let her new status make her forget where she came from, or who still struggled in the shadows. Their love grew, deeper as the months passed, built on mutual respect and shared purpose, as much as mate bond passion. Theron never stopped being grateful for Lyra's presence in his life, and he showed it not through grand gestures, but through consistent actions. He consulted her on major decisions. He supported her initiatives, even when they challenged traditional power structures. He made sure she knew every day that he valued her mind as much as he loved her heart. Lyra gave him the same in return, providing counsel when needed, but also simply being a safe space where the burden of kingship could be set aside, and he could just be Theron, a man healing from trauma and learning to trust again. Thank you so much for staying with us through this entire journey of courage, redemption, and true love. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like and share it with others who need to be reminded that sometimes the smallest voices can change everything. Subscribe for more supernatural romance, stories where love conquers fear and justice prevails. Now let us see how their story concludes. The final test of their bond came almost a year after the conspiracy trials ended. A neighboring kingdom, sensing potential weakness during the period of upheaval and change, sent an alpha named Darius to negotiate what they claimed were trade agreements, but what was actually a thinly veiled threat. Darius was old-school alpha, the kind who believed in dominance hierarchies and keeping omegas submissive. His disdain for Lyra's position as queen was obvious from the moment he arrived, and he made several calculated comments designed to undermine her authority and test Theron's commitment to his mate. The situation came to a head during a formal dinner when Darius suggested that Theron's reforms giving voice to lower-ranking wolves were making the kingdom soft and vulnerable. He said that a true alpha ruled through strength, and that having an Omega queen sent a message of weakness to enemies. The insult was clear, and the room went silent, waiting for Theron's response. But before the king could speak, Lyra set down her wineglass and addressed Darius directly, her voice calm and carrying clearly through the tense atmosphere. She told Darius that he was correct about one thing. The kingdom had changed, but it had not grown weak. It had grown stronger because strength came from unity and trust, not from fear and oppression. She said that an alpha who needed to dominate others, to feel powerful, was not strong, but insecure. And a kingdom built on such foundations would always be vulnerable to internal collapse, as they had nearly experienced. True strength came from every member of the pack knowing their voice mattered, and their welfare was protected. That kind of loyalty could not be taken by force, only earned through just leadership. Lyra's words hung in the air, and she watched Darius's face turn red with anger. He started to respond with something undoubtedly cutting, but Theron's voice cut through like a blade of ice. The king told Darius that he would watch his tone when addressing the queen, and that the Omega who sat beside him had more courage, intelligence, and honor in her smallest finger than Darius had in his entire body. Theron explained that Lyra had saved his life and his kingdom by standing up to conspirators when everyone else stayed silent. She had proven her strength through action, and anyone who questioned her worth would be questioning his judgment, which would not end well for them. The display of united front and clear hierarchy effectively ended Darius's attempts at manipulation. The negotiations concluded quickly after that with terms favorable to Theron's kingdom, and Darius returned home having learned that the rumors of weakness were greatly exaggerated. More importantly, word spread to other kingdoms that the Alpha King and his Omega Queen were not to be underestimated or divided. They ruled as true partners, and their bond made them formidable. In the quiet of their chambers that night, Lyra thanked Theron for defending her, though she admitted she had been prepared to do a lot worse than lecture Darius about leadership philosophy. Theron laughed, the sound warm and genuine, and pulled her close. He told her he had no doubt she could have handled Darius on her own, but it felt good to publicly claim her as his equal and his mate. Then his expression turned serious, and he said there was something he wanted to discuss with her. He told her that he had been thinking about legacy and the future. They had stabilized the kingdom and implemented reforms, but lasting change required continued commitment. He asked how she would feel about creating a formal council position dedicated to representing the interests of lower-ranking wolves and ensuring their voices were heard in governance. The position would have real power, not just symbolic representation, and he wanted her input on designing the role and selecting the first person to fill it. Lyra felt emotion tighten her throat at the trust and respect implicit in the request, and they spent hours that night planning how to make the vision reality. The years that followed were not without challenges. Governance never was. There were border disputes and economic pressures, natural disasters and political intrigues. But Theron and Lyra faced each obstacle together, their bond a source of strength, and their complementary skills making them effective leaders. They had 3 children eventually, 2 daughters and a son, who grew up learning that rank was less important than character, and that true leadership meant serving others rather than dominating them. Lyra never forgot her roots in the archives, and she maintained the tradition of spending 1 day a month working alongside the archivists she had once been invisible among. It kept her grounded and connected to the reality of ordinary wolves' lives in a way that many royals lost touch with. Theron often joined her when he could, finding something peaceful in the quiet work of preserving history and organizing knowledge. They became known as the Reformer King and the Archivist Queen, rulers who had transformed their kingdom through justice and partnership. On the 10th anniversary of the day Lyra had stood up in the council chamber, they held a celebration in honor of all the wolves who had shown courage in the face of injustice over the past decade. It had become a tradition, a reminder that change was possible when ordinary people chose to do extraordinary things. As Lyra stood beside Theron watching the festivities, their children playing nearby and their kingdom thriving, she thought about how different her life had turned out from what she imagined during those invisible years in the archives. She had never wanted power or prestige, had never imagined she would be queen or that she would change the course of history. She had simply seen something wrong and chosen to speak up, driven by a sense of justice that would not let her stay silent. Everything that came after, the mate bond and the love and the partnership, had been gifts she never expected but would always treasure. She had learned that sometimes the most important choices were the ones that terrified you, and that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Theron must have sensed her reflective mood, because he took her hand and raised it to his lips, his eyes warm with the love that had only deepened over their years together. He did not need to speak for her to know what he was thinking. They had been through fire together and emerged stronger. They had built something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal and loss, and they had proven that fate might bring people together. But it was choice and commitment and daily acts of love that built a life worth living. The celebration continued into the night, music and laughter filling the palace grounds. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities, but tonight was for joy and gratitude. Lyra leaned into Theron's side, feeling the solid warmth of him and the steady pulse of their bond, and smiled. She had defended his name before the council all those years ago, and in return he had given her a place to belong, a voice that mattered, and a love that would last forever. It was more than enough. It was everything. Thank you for joining us on this epic journey of love, courage, and transformation. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and let us know in the comments what part of Theron and Lyra's story resonated most with you. Your support means the world and helps us create more content like this. Until next time, may you always have the courage to speak your truth, and may you find a love that sees and values exactly who you are.